Heyo, and welcome back for another lesson. This is Unit 1, Lesson 5. We're going to talk about functions. Today is the last lesson of this first unit already. Okay, so that means that we're going to be having a test right around the corner here, and we'll talk more about that in class. Okay, but again, this is your last lesson for the first unit already. Your two objectives. Okay, I got two of them today. One is to identify and solve a function. Tell me what a function is and be able to solve for one. Okay, and the next one is to make an input-output table for a function. Okay, input-output tables are something you are going to see the rest of the year, and functions are something we're going to work with the rest of the year. Okay, all through second semester, stuff like that. So these two things are very important. I'm not going to downplay the other stuff we've done so far this unit, but this is probably the most important so far. Making an input-output table is a skill that we're going to have. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump right into the lesson. Okay, first we have to define what a function actually is. Okay, so we got the definition written right here. A function is a rule that establishes a relationship between two quantities called the input and the output. Okay, so a function will take on the form, it's going to be an equation. Okay, so it's got to have an equal sign in it. And it will look something like this. So y equal, oops, let me erase that. Don't know why my iPad likes to do that sometimes where it drags, but okay, so y equals 7x plus 3. Okay, that's an example of a function. Okay, right there. So we got a y value, an equal sign, and then we got an x value with some numbers and some operations. Okay, important stuff. The x value. Okay, gotta know what the x value is. The x value is also called the input. Okay, that is what we put into the function. Okay, so the input is what we put in. Okay, so it is also called the domain of the function. Okay, so input and domain are the same thing, and those are both the x value. Okay, so when we put some number in for x, that's going to be our input. Okay, the y value then is called the output, and that is what we get for an answer. Okay, so we're going to put some number in for x and get something back for y, get an answer that we have to solve for. Okay, and it is also called the range. Okay, now you will need to know these four words. You will need to know what variable they are associated with. So input and domain are the x value, output and range are the y value. Okay, now let's talk about what all that nonsense means. Okay, so this is our second objective we're going to talk about now. Make an input-output table for the function y equals 3x plus 2. Okay, and then they're telling us use these numbers for the domain. Okay, now your book assignment is not going to tell you to use those numbers. Okay, the reason why I'm having you use these numbers is because when we start graphing and things like that later on during the school year, you're going to use those 5 numbers every single time. Okay, alright, so this is the setup for an input-output table. Okay, this whole thing right here is what an input-output table is going to look at. Like, you're going to have to draw these out actually. Okay, so I've got a column here for my x values. I've got a column here for my y values. Alright, and then this column in here is for the function. It's where you're going to show your work. So the very first thing that you're going to want to do, okay, is write your function in there that they give you. So I'm going to write in here y equals 3x plus 2. Alright, now they tell us that we're using -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2 for the domain. So we have to remember what domain means. Okay, we just talked about that. The domains are the inputs or the x values. Okay, so I'm just going to put those numbers in my table. -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. Okay, those go in there. Alright, now in this middle section, this is where I'm going to show my work and how I'm plugging these in. Okay, so all I'm going to do is plug in my x values in place of x. Alright, well the y doesn't change here, so I'm going to put y equals, this is 3 times x, so it becomes 3 times -2 plus 2. Alright, Then my job is to solve that and get a y value right over here. So I need to tell what does y equal if it equals 3 times negative 2 plus 2. Alright, well, order of operations, I should do the times first. 3 times negative 2 is negative 6, and negative 6 plus 2 is negative 4. So that's my y value there. Okay? Now I'm going to do the same thing for negative 1. Y equals, it's 3 times x, so it's 3 times negative 1 plus 2. Alright, and order of operations again. 3 times negative 1 is negative 3. Negative 3 plus 2 is negative 1. Okay, and we're going to finish plugging in our table here. This is 3 times 0 plus 2. 3 times 0 is 0, plus 2 is 2. Okay, then we're going to get y equals 3 times 1 plus 2. Okay, 3 times 1 is 3, plus 2 is 5. And the last one, y equals 3 times 2 plus 2. Okay, 3 times 2 is 6, plus 2 is 8. Alright, and this is my input-output table. I will expect you to be able to make one of those. Alright, you need to fill it out just like I filled it out. And I know some of you are going to think this middle section is a pain. Okay, when you look in your book, they're going to give you lazy input-output tables. Okay, where they don't put all this stuff in the middle. This part is going to be crucial the farther we go along in the school year and when we use harder numbers and have harder problems. Okay, I'm talking about in the second half of the school year when we have to graph what are called quadratic equations and we're going to have to fill out input-output tables like this. This part becomes more difficult, so you need to plug it in and see what you're doing. Okay, and for this kind of problems, I don't necessarily expect you to show your work, meaning over here, tell me 3 times negative 2 plus 2. Okay, and go 3 times negative 2 is negative 6 plus 2, and that's negative 4. Okay, you don't need to do that right now because most of you can do that in your head. If you do need to do that, though, show your work. Okay? But this is what an input-output table looks like. You need to have your inputs. You need to show me how you plug it into the function, and show me what answer you get for your y. Alright? So that's how an input-output table looks. Now let's continue tying this into functions. Okay, we need to talk a little bit more about functions here. Over here I've got an input-output table. Okay, and I want to know a couple things. I want to know what is the domain of this function and what is the range. Okay, because we're going to ask you some of those type of questions. So, remember, the domain is the x values. So my domain is just, I'm going to put brackets around it because I'm making a set of numbers, and anytime I write a set of numbers I want to put brackets. So my domain is the inputs. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, my range is my outputs. 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, that's it. Alright, now notice I've got 4 inputs here. You got the number 1 and it goes with the output 3. You got the number 2, it goes with the output 4. Got the number 3, it goes with the output 5, and I got the number 4 that goes with the output 6. Okay, this over here is a function. Now notice what happens over here. I've got the number 1 twice in my input. Okay? That means I've got, and when I look at the 1 has an output of 3 and it has an output of 4. That's a problem because that means that if I plugged the number 1 in, I got different answers. Okay? That cannot happen in a function. Okay? This over here is not a function. Okay? And it is not a function because the same input right here, these two, have different outputs. Okay? I've got the same input that has different outputs. That cannot happen in a function. Okay? So you need to write this down. A function cannot have an input that repeats itself. Okay? Meaning, if you look at this table over here and you see an input that happens twice, okay, and it has different outputs, it's not a function. Alright, so they're going to ask you, they're going to give you some tables like these and say, is it a function or not? So if it has more than one input, and that input has a different number attached with it on the output side, it's not a function. Okay, that cannot happen. Alright, let's talk a little bit more about functions and then we'll be done.